Egypt is an Afro-Asiatic transcontinental country spanning the northeast corner of Africa and southwest corner of Asia, with a land bridge formed by the Sinai Peninsula. Before its colonization, Egypt was owned by the Ottoman Empire since 1517. In 1798, a French army led by Napoleon Bonaparte landed at Egypt. Napoleon hoped that if he occupied Egypt, British links with India would be disrupted. Napoleon defeated the Egyptians on land at the Battle of the Pyramids, but he was utterly defeated at sea by the British Navy. So Napoleon abandoned his army and left Egypt. After Napoleon's invasion force withdrew, an Ottoman military officer named Mehmet Ali established his own independent government in Egypt by 1811. By the time he died in 1849, he had also invaded the Sudan and Syria. In 1822, Britain took an interest in Egypt and constituted a de facto protectorate over the country, but had no legal basis. Egypt was so important because it was a key part of the old spice and trade routes between Europe and Asia. Egypt provided the quickest way of maintaining communications between Britain and India, making trading easier between them and the economy better for Britain. Also, the production of cotton in Egypt stood greatly in Britain's favor. Egypt's mineral and energy resources include petroleum, limestone, natural gas, phosphates, gold, and iron ore. Out of the 45 tribes in Egypt, there were 3 major ones living in the 18th to 19th century. One of the tribes in Egypt are called the Bedouin, and they are generally divided under a few sub-tribes like the Aligat, Hamada, and Geblier. They all have their unparalleled knowledge of the desert. Another tribe in Egypt are called the Nubians. The Nubians are people who inhabited in Nubia that is located in southern Egypt and northern Sudan. Nubia was a land of great natural wealth. However, the fall of the last Nubian kingdom was in 1900. But till today, what distinguishes them in their cultural legacy that is manifested in their ethnic dressing, music, dances, and traditions. Another tribe is the Gawazi, and they were very inclined on dancing. They would perform dances at ceremonies like marriages and births. However, they received brutal banishment in 1834 by Muhammad Ali due to religious reasons. Egypt technically is not considered a colony. Egypt had not been discovered by the British, and yet the British controlled the finances, government personnel, and armed forces of the country. And the French were regretful that they let British take the prize of Egypt from them. In 1859, when the Suez Canal was beginning to get built, the Egyptian government and French forces partnered together to build the trade route. However, Britain gained control of the Suez Canal due to the heavy debt of the Egyptian government. With this advantage, Britain decided to heavily tax the ships which passed through. This brought mass amounts of money of which the Egyptians never saw. Instead of going to maintain Egypt or even the Suez Canal itself, the money went straight to the British government as profit. When news that Britain had colonized Egypt and was using the money for themselves, Egyptians quickly began to leave the country. The British decided to impose heavy public taxes on the Egyptians, something that the Egyptians had never encountered before. The taxes were so heavy that in order to pay them, people needed to stay in Egypt in order to pay them off. Also, without any Egyptian permission, the British Army took upper-class citizens from Egypt and trained them to become British soldiers to fight their battles for them. Broad-based nonviolent action erupted against British occupation forces and the colonial administration of Egypt in 1919 following the exile of popular pro-independence leaders due to the unfair treatment from Britain to the Egyptians. Nonviolent boycotts, petitions, demonstrations, and a sustained general strike by students, professionals, and workers forced the British to declare limited independence for Egypt on February 28, 1922. Although Egypt still had financial troubles after independence was won, a new Egyptian constitution was created in 1923, and a man named Zaghloul also became their prime minister until the 1950s. Eventually, Egypt regained full control of their land, and overall, the Egyptian struggle for independence from 1919 to 1922 is hailed as the first nonviolent mass protest in the modern Middle East. Since Britain did not have a legal basis in Egypt, the culture of the country did not falter dramatically. Most of the Egyptians stayed Muslim. Imperialism is a policy of extending a country's power and influence through diplomacy or military power. Despite the nonviolent quarrels Egypt had with Britain, there are now aggressive protests going on in Egypt regarding their rulers and government. Back in the summer of 2013, Egypt had endured 5 days of violent protests with people on the streets calling for the resignation of President Hosni Mubarak. These protests took place in Tahrir Square in Cairo, including the one between the Muslim Brotherhood supporters of Egypt's President Mohamed Morsi and the police on August 14, 2013. Many of these protests and quarrels take place today regarding the president and the government. Attacks today are also mounted against police and army targets in Sinai by Islamic terrorist organization Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis. I predict that if Egypt does not take action regarding their government and president, then protests and terrorist attacks like these will still go on. The three colors of the Egyptian flag, along with its national emblem, represent the nation's modern history. The flag's red stripe represents the period prior to the 1952 revolution when King Farouk ruled the nation. The white stripe symbolizes the revolution, and the black stripe refers to the beginning of the modern form of government. The flag also includes Egypt's coat of arms, also known as the Eagle of Saladin. The eagle represents the Ayyubid Sultan who ruled Egypt throughout the 12th century. Egypt consists of the three most famous pyramids in the world, and its terrain is a vast desert plateau interrupted by the Nile Valley and Delta. Egypt is 99.6% Egyptian, and its main language is Arabic, but English and French are widely understood by educated classes. Egypt is 90% Muslim and 10% Christian. The Egyptian military branches include the Army, Navy, and Egyptian Air Force, and is highly financially aided by the Obama administration. Egypt's unemployment rate is 13.4%, and its population below poverty line is 22%. Despite many of the protests going on, Egypt is a beautiful place with an interesting history.